The day my own son changed the locks on my house while I was buying flowers for my late wife's grave, I realized blood doesn't always protect your heart. I came home carrying fresh roses, but my key wouldn't turn. My son opened the door, looked straight into my eyes, and calmly said, "Dad, you don't live here anymore." I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I quietly placed every spare key into his hand, wished him a peaceful evening, and walked away. He smiled because he believed he had won. What he didn't know was that I would spend the night in a small motel, and the very next morning a sheriff would knock on that same front door, holding one official paper that would change everything. If you enjoy emotional family stories with unforgettable twists and meaningful life lessons, I'd truly appreciate you subscribing to Behind Dad. Before we continue, I'd also like to mention that the pictures you see throughout this video are creative visual dramatizations inspired by this story. They are not real photographs from my family's life. My name is James Carter. I'm 72 years old, and that little white house was the only dream my late wife Margaret and I ever truly owned. We worked overtime for decades, skipped vacations, and sacrificed countless comforts just to pay it off. After Margaret passed away, every room reminded me of her. I still left her favorite coffee mug beside the sink every Sunday morning because it made the silence feel a little less painful. My son Daniel had started visiting more often during the past few months. At first, I thought he simply wanted to spend time with me. Then he began asking strange questions about the deed, my savings, and whether I planned to move into assisted living. I always smiled and changed the subject. I never imagined those questions were leading somewhere far darker. When I returned from the cemetery that afternoon, my old locks were gone. My clothes, family albums, and Margaret's quilt were packed into boxes on the porch. Daniel folded his arms and calmly said, "Dad, this is what's best for everyone. You'll be more comfortable somewhere else." My chest felt so heavy I could barely breathe. I looked at the house where I had raised my family, then quietly handed him every spare key I owned. Without another word, I walked toward the motel across town. As I checked into my room, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from the county sheriff's office asking me to call back immediately. I returned the sheriff's call from the motel parking lot. His voice was calm and respectful. He asked me only one question. "Mr. Carter, did you personally give your son permission to change the locks or take possession of your home?" I answered with one word. "No." There was a brief silence before he told me someone had filed a legal complaint involving my property, and he needed to meet me first thing the next morning. He wouldn't explain anything else over the phone. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Margaret standing on our front porch, smiling the way she always had after a long day. I kept wondering if I had somehow failed as a father. Love had always come naturally to me, but maybe I had mistaken kindness for wisdom. The motel room felt empty in a way I had never experienced before. My suitcase sat beside the bed, holding everything I owned that Daniel had allowed me to take. I reached into my wallet and looked at the old photograph of Margaret and me on our 40th anniversary. I quietly whispered, "I hope I make the right choice tomorrow." Even after all those years, talking to her still gave me strength. The next morning I arrived at the sheriff's office, carrying a small folder with the original deed, tax records, and insurance papers Margaret had always insisted we keep safe. Sheriff Robert Collins welcomed me into his office. Sitting beside him was attorney Michael Harris, the same lawyer who had helped my wife prepare her estate years earlier. The moment he saw me, he stood up and shook my hand. His serious expression told me this situation was much bigger than I had imagined. Michael opened a thick legal file containing certified property records, trust documents, and copies of paperwork Daniel had recently submitted. At first glance, everything looked official, but then Michael pointed to several signatures that weren't mine. He quietly explained that someone had attempted to claim authority over my home using documents that were legally invalid. Before he could continue, the office door suddenly opened. Daniel walked inside looking confident, but the moment he noticed the sheriff, the attorney, and the open legal file on the table, the color drained from his face. Sheriff Collins slowly reached for a sealed envelope and said, "Daniel, before anyone says another word, you need to read this court order." Daniel stared at the sealed court order without touching it. The confidence he had shown the day before disappeared completely. His hands were trembling. I looked at my own son and felt two emotions fighting inside me. One part of me was deeply hurt. The other part still remembered the little boy who used to wait by the window every evening for me to come home from work. That memory made the pain even heavier. I never imagined our family would end up sitting inside the sheriff's office because of the home we had built together. Sheriff Collins calmly instructed Daniel to open the envelope. As he unfolded the papers, his face turned pale. The order temporarily blocked any attempt to occupy, transfer, rent, or alter my property until the court completed its review. Every lock change, every claim of possession, and every action taken without my permission was now under official investigation. Daniel looked at me as if he expected me to rescue him, but I remained silent. Sometimes the truth has to speak louder than a parent's love. Attorney Michael Harris then opened another section of the legal file. He explained that years before Margaret passed away, she had created a living trust with one special provision. She worried that financial pressure or bad advice could someday tempt someone to take advantage of me. The trust gave me the exclusive lifetime right to possess and control the property. No child, relative, or future heir could legally remove me or change the locks without my written consent and independent legal approval. Margaret had protected me long before any of us realized I would need that protection. Daniel finally lowered his head and confessed everything. His business had failed almost 6 months earlier. Credit card debt, overdue loans, and unpaid bills kept growing until he panicked. Instead of asking me for help, he convinced himself that taking control of my house would allow him to refinance the property and solve his financial problems. Tears filled his eyes as he admitted he had believed I would eventually forgive him after everything was fixed. My heart broke hearing those words because I realized fear had changed my son into someone neither of us recognized. Michael quietly reached into his briefcase and placed one final sealed envelope on the table. Margaret's handwriting covered the front. He looked at me and softly said, "James, this is the last instruction your wife left behind. Everything depends on what is written inside." My hands were shaking as I opened Margaret's final envelope. The room became so quiet that I could hear the ticking clock on the sheriff's wall. Her handwriting looked exactly the way I remembered it. She wrote that she prayed this letter would never be needed because it would mean our family had allowed fear and greed to replace love. She explained that she had created the trust to protect me, not to divide our family. Then I reached the final paragraph. Margaret wrote that if Daniel ever admitted the truth before causing permanent damage, she wanted me to remember the son I raised instead of the mistake he made. She believed accountability should come before forgiveness, but she never wanted revenge to become the final chapter of our family. I couldn't stop the tears. Even after she was gone, she was still protecting my heart. Daniel finally stood up and admitted everything without hiding behind excuses. His business had collapsed under crushing debt, and every bank had rejected his loan applications. He convinced himself that taking control of my home was the only way to survive. He changed the locks because he feared I would never agree to his plan. Looking into his eyes, I didn't see an enemy. I saw a frightened son whose pride had destroyed his judgment. That realization hurt more than losing a house ever could. Sheriff Collins confirmed that the court order immediately restored my legal possession of the property. Daniel was required to return every key, remove the unauthorized locks, and leave the home that same day. The investigation also confirmed that the paperwork he relied on had no legal effect because Margaret's trust protected the property completely. Daniel quietly handed me the new keys. We drove back together in silence. He carried every box back inside with tears running down his face. Before leaving, he hugged me and whispered, "Dad, I'm sorry I forgot the man who gave me everything." I hugged him back, but I also reminded him that trust is rebuilt one honest decision at a time. That evening, I unlocked my front door again. I placed Margaret's photograph back on the living room table and thanked her for loving our family enough to prepare for a day she hoped would never come. I realized justice had protected my home, but truth had given my son one last chance to become the man he was meant to be. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment because your words may encourage another family to choose honesty before it's too late. Share this story with someone who believes parents deserve love, respect, and gratitude while they are still here. Thank you for spending this time with me on Behind Dad. Remember, a house can be locked with keys, but a family can only stay together through truth, respect, and forgiveness.